Well, good afternoon. It's really great to be speaking to you again today on this penultimate Thursday Thoughts episode. As I said a few weeks ago, we're going to be drawing the first series of Thursday Thoughts to a close next week, just to take a bit of a break for the summer. But I've really enjoyed making these videos. It's been great to hear some of your responses to them. And just to say, if this is your first Thursday Thoughts video you're watching, my name's Simon. I'm one of the leaders at Ascot Life Church, and over the past sort of 13 weeks we've been looking at various objections and questions some of us have towards Christianity. And I guess over the past few weeks we've been looking at what we could call the intellectual objections to Christianity. Questions, like, how could a loving God allow suffering? Or, did Jesus really rise from the dead? Is there any evidence at all for God's existence? We've been looking at those sort of intellectual objections, as I say. But for this week and next week, I want to turn our attention to, I guess, what we could term the more experiential objections to Christianity we might have. See, I think for many of us, what stops us really looking into Christianity is not so much the kind of intellectual doubts we might have, but it's the experience that Christianity might give us. Either because we've had a bad experience of Christianity in our past that left us seeing it as dull or oppressive, or because we kind of look at the experience of Christians today. We look at the church and think, I could never be part of that community. I could never fit in there. We think, I could never be a Christian because I just couldn't do the experience. And so next week I want to look at the question around church and ask, what is even there for? Why should we bother with it, particularly if we don't call ourselves Christians? But today I want to speak to those of us who maybe have experienced Christianity in our past, but for various reasons have concluded that it's not for us. Either because we've experienced it and it's been dull and boring, or because it's kind of been oppressive and restrictive. Some of us maybe have concluded that therefore Christianity is not for us. It's not something we want to look into because we've already tried it and it hasn't worked. We say things like, yes, Christianity, there might be some good in it. It might be true for you, but it's not true for me. It doesn't work for me. It's not my truth. And just with the few minutes I've got this morning, I just want to offer a few brief responses to you if that would be your position. First thing I'd say to you, if that's your thoughts, is that Christianity is a truth which, if it is true for everyone. Christianity, because of its very nature, it can't be a truth which is true for some and not others, which works for some and not others. No, it's something which, if it is true at all, is universally true for all of us. You see, that there are some truths in the world which can be true for some and not others. For instance, I believe it to be 100% true that coffee is far superior to tea. I mean, tea is just like a mug of hot water soaked in leaves. I mean, that's all it really is. It kind of has no substance, no body, and it also just has no flavour. To make it taste nice, you have to put sugar into it, and then it covers up the taste of the tea. That is truth for me. Coffee is better than tea. But of course, though I might consider that to be truth, if I'm a bit more of an honest mood and being a bit less facetious, I have to appreciate that whilst it's true for me, it is not necessarily true for everyone else. It is what we would call a subjective truth. It is a truth that is subject only to me. It's, I guess, what we could call a private truth. Yes, it may be true for me that coffee is better, but it is private to me. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true of other people. whilst there are some truths that can be true for some and not others, there are also others which can't. There are some truths which are true whether or not we believe them. For instance, it is true that right now we are in a pandemic. That is a 100% truth. Unless we've all been swindled and it's all a conspiracy, it is true that we are in the coronavirus pandemic. Now, some of us might not like that truth. In fact, most of us don't like that truth. And some of us might even go to the extent of convincing ourselves that it isn't true, acting as if it's not true, flaunting government guidelines because we just want to kind of stick our fingers in our eyes and say, that's not true, I'm not going to believe it. But even if we take that stance, the fact is that it is still true that we're in a pandemic. Even if we act as if it's not true, even if we don't accept it, the truth doesn't change. We could still catch coronavirus because it's still out there. That's an objective truth, something which is true regardless of whether we believe it or not. It's kind of like a public truth. It's not something locked up inside, but it's true even if we don't let it inside. And Christianity presents itself as this second sort of truth. Presents itself as a truth that is objective, that is public, that is true for everyone, regardless of their acceptance or rejection of it. One thing that the early Christians were famed for saying in Rome was that Jesus is Lord. As kind of their slogan, as it were. And when they were saying this, they weren't making a private truth claim. They weren't saying something that could be true for them and not others. They weren't saying Jesus is Lord of our hearts, but he might not be Lord of yours. He can be Lord if you choose him to be, but we're all free to make our own choice. No. What they were saying was that Jesus is Lord, Jesus is King, and therefore we should all submit to him. We should all give our lives to him. They were saying Jesus is Lord of the whole universe, whether you accept it or not. They were making an objective, public truth claim. And other people in the Roman world heard it this way. That's why the Roman authorities eventually came to persecute the Christians. It was because when they said Jesus is Lord, they knew what they were saying. They knew that they were making a truth claim true of everyone by saying Jesus is Lord, and therefore Caesar is not Lord. He's subordinate, he's a lesser king because Jesus is the true king. When Christians made this claim, they were making an objective truth claim, and the case remains the same. That Christianity is something which, if it is true of anyone, is true of all of us. It can't be true for some and not others. C.S. Lewis says in one of his books that Christianity is something which, if it is not true, is of no importance, but if it is true, it is of infinite importance. It's of universal importance. It can't work for some and not others. It can't be true of some and not others. If it's true of anyone, it's true of all of us. If Jesus is Lord at all, he's Lord over all of us. And so what we must do is not kind of flippantly discard Christianity or just ignore it on the basis of saying it's true for you but it's not true for me. That doesn't work logically. Now what we have to do is look into the claims of Christianity. Look into the evidence. Say, did Jesus really rise from the dead? Is there evidence for him being God, for him being Lord of the world now? And as I hope we've seen in the previous episodes of this series, I think actually if you look into the evidence, particularly the evidence for Jesus' resurrection, we'll see that there are good reasons for believing the early Christians when they say that Jesus is Lord. There's good reasons for believing that Jesus is who he said he was and actually rose from the dead. That's the thing we've got to decide for ourselves. We can't just discard it by saying it's true for some and not others. We have to see if it's true at all, because if it is true at all, it makes claims on all of us. But of course, The thing is, if Christianity is true, we would expect it to have an impact on us. We would expect that if we were to look into Christianity, to kind of look into Jesus, that it would have power, it would have an impact on who we are. But that's the problem for many of us, isn't it? We kind of experience Christianity maybe in school or through family members when we were younger, and we found it not to be all that powerful, not to have any impact on us. Instead, it was just kind of dull and boring. And so we think, therefore, I must reject it. If Christianity claims to be about knowing the God of the universe and it was that boring, then clearly it can't be true. But here's my question to you, if that would be your response. My question to you would be, is it actually Christianity you're rejecting? Or is it some dead, distorted form of Christianity? Are you rejecting the real, authentic Christianity, or just some dead form of it? One of the things we're talking about a lot at the moment is, of course, our need for a vaccine to immunize us against the coronavirus. And I'm no scientist, but my understanding is that the way some vaccines work is what they do is they introduce a dead form of the virus into your bloodstream so that your body and immune system can learn how to defend itself against it in a dead form that can do you no harm. So that when you are approached by the real form, by the live form, you know how to defend yourself against it. Even though it's alive and can do you a lot more damage, you know how to attack it, how to fend it off. And I think this is very similar to what has happened to maybe many of us who have experienced Christianity in our past. It's like we've experienced a kind of dead form of Christianity. One where, there's no living, breathing relationship with Jesus, but it's just all rules and statements, doctrines and traditions. Now, hear me rightly, I'm not saying that those things are wrong. I think it's actually good to have some traditions passed down to us. Sometimes it's good to believe doctrines and understand what Christianity is all about. But here's the thing, if you divorce those from the kind of living relationship with Jesus that is at the center of Christianity, then all you've got is dead religion. All you've got is just kind of the dead externals. And I think this is what many of us, maybe unintentionally, have experienced in our past with regard to Christianity. We've experienced the dead externals. We've been given the rules, the hymns, the traditions. And without any living relationship with Jesus, it's just been dead. It's just been dull and boring. And so we're kind of immunized to the real thing. So that when we do later in life meet Christians who really know Jesus, or we encounter Christianity, we go to church, even though we might be encountering the real thing, because we've been immunized by a dead version of it, we're now unresponsive to it. We're immediately shut off to it because we've been immunized against the real thing. Now, of course, that might not sound like a bad thing to us. I mean, of course, it's not a bad thing to be immunized against a disease. And what I'm kind of saying here is that Christianity is a bit like a disease. But I think to really drive this point home, it might help to just shift my metaphor a bit here by talking about food. I've got a friend, a very close friend of mine, who unfortunately does not like cheese and tomato. And I've never quite gotten to the bottom of why, but I think part of it is due to a bad experience he had with cheese and tomato in his past. Maybe he had like a mouldy pizza, or kind of a burnt lasagna, or something like that. I don't know. He had a bad experience with cheese and tomato. But even though he may have good reasons for his dislike, the fact is that he now misses out on all the good versions of cheese and tomato. He misses out on pizza, on lasagna, on all those wonderful things, on nachos, for goodness sake. He doesn't get to enjoy all these things because he had a bad experience in his past. And for me, I think that's tragic. I love food, and so I mourn for him that his bad experience has put him off these things. But what's even more tragic is that, again, this can happen to us with regards to Christianity. We can be given kind of a false version of it in our past. We can be given a version that was full of rules and legalism and harshness, or full of dullness, like lacking in life. We can be given the equivalent of a mouldy pizza for Christianity. And what this means is that when we're presented with the real thing, when we're presented with Jesus in all his glory and all his fullness, it means that we automatically think it won't be good. We automatically think we won't like the taste of Christianity because we had a bad experience. And that means that we miss out on all of the glory of it. We miss out on all of the joy that it really has to offer. You see, the truth is that anything bad that you experienced of Christianity in your past, the fault does not lie with Jesus. It can't. Because Jesus, as I read about him in the Bible, is far better than we can imagine him to be in every single way. Jesus is more loving than you can ever imagine him to be. He's more kind and forgiving than you can ever imagine him to be. And he's also far less boring than you might imagine as well. Jesus is not someone who, if you follow him, will ruin your life and restrict it. Actually, Jesus, if you read about him in the Bible, it can be quite scary. It can be quite weird. It can be quite an adventure to follow him. He's sometimes a bit too radical. The thing is, if you look into real Christianity, look into what it's really about, don't just look at the externals, but look at the man who's at the centre of it, I think you will see something that is not boring, nor is it restrictive, but actually it's full of life, full of joy. That's the second thing I'd say to you. If you say, I've tried Christianity, it's not for me, I'd say, have you really tried it though? Is the Christianity you rejected the real thing, or is it just a dead version? I would say to you, if your experience of it has been that it's dull or restrictive, I'd say, I don't think you've experienced the real thing. Jesus is not like that. Following Jesus is an adventure that will change your life in every way for the better. But that leads me on to the third and final thing I'd say. I think there's a third kind of different reason why some of us might count ourselves out of looking into Christianity and say it's not for us. And that reason is because we feel we just couldn't hack it. Maybe we look at other Christians we might know and think, I could never measure up to their standard. Or maybe we look at the words Jesus says and think, I could never do that. I could never follow him. I could never be that kind of person. So we just count ourselves out, rule ourselves out. But let me just say a couple brief things to you, if that's your response. First thing to say is that actually it's a good thing to take stock before we follow Jesus. In Luke 14, Jesus talks about how we should prepare for the cost of following him. And he compares following him to being like a construction project and says that when you go about a construction project, you make sure you've got all the materials and resources before you embark on it so that you can complete what you've started. And in the same way, if we choose to become Christians, should consider if we're ready for the long haul, if we're ready for the cost of following Jesus. But the question we have to answer is not so much, am I ready to be the perfect Christian? Am I ready to make myself perfect? Am I ready to live up to Jesus' standards? The question I think we should more be asking is, am I ready to rely on Jesus daily? Am I ready to to every day give myself to him and allow him to change me? Am I resolved to rely on him for the rest of my life? Because the truth is that Jesus, he doesn't expect us to come to him with everything sewn up. He doesn't expect him to come to him with no mess in our life, no sin in our life, nothing that needs fixing, no brokenness. In fact, Jesus is quite the opposite. Jesus bids us come to him with all our brokenness. He asks us to bring our sin and our mess and our shame to him so that he can be the one to fix it. So that he can be the one to make us new, to renew us. And make no mistake, if you give your life to Jesus, he will set about a work in you. He will not just forgive you of your sin and give you freedom from it, but he will also make you a new person. You start chipping off things that shouldn't be there. He will start working on traits that are not quite living up to his glory. He will set about a work in you. And so, if you do feel that the reason you could never become a Christian is because you're inadequate, it might help you to know that two of the foremost leaders in Christianity were firstly Peter, who denied Jesus at the moment he needed him most. And secondly, Paul, who didn't just deny Jesus, but actively persecuted and killed those who followed him. Yet Jesus' grace and power turned them around. And you know what? If you give your life to Jesus, that same power will be at work in you. He will begin a work in you, which he promises he will complete. So we don't have to discount ourselves with following Jesus if we don't feel up for it. No, all we have to resolve is that we can rely on him every day as he does the work in us that changes us to reflect him. And so, all that is to say, I want to encourage you to consider looking into Christianity, or to reconsider looking into it. Yes, maybe you've had bad experiences in the past. Yes, maybe Christians have let you down. But here's the thing. If it is true that Jesus has risen from the dead, if he really has risen and is now Lord of history, that is a truth that has implications on us. That is a truth that, if we accept it, will change our lives as he gives us new purpose, as he renews us as we come to him. So I want to encourage you to consider looking into Christianity. Maybe one way you could do this is by going back through the kind of back catalogue of Thursday Thoughts and looking at a few more of these questions that we've answered over this time. Or maybe a good thing for you to do is now to get involved in a church, to explore these questions with other Christians, to see what they can give you. And so next week I'm going to be looking at the question of church. Why should we bother it? What good can it do for us? But of course, you'd be more than welcome to join any church or us, Ascot Life Church, this Sunday. We're live streaming our service at 10 a.m. and it's 6 p.m. You'd be more than welcome to join us anonymously if you wish. But as I say, I hope that my response to this question has been helpful. You can always carry on the conversation with me if you'd like to email me at simon@ascotlife.church. But I hope that's been helpful to you, and looking forward to speaking to you next week in our final Thursday Thoughts. Thanks.